we have to be very, 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 very clear. This team I repeat, cannot function with Caitlin Clark on the floor and Stephanie White as the head coach.
Here is a statement that will make half of you furious and the other half nod along knowingly. The Indiana Fever cannot function with Caitlin Clark on the floor and Stephanie White on the sideline. Read that again. Let it sit. This is not some reactionary hot take lobbed into the void by a casual observer riding the latest wave of social media outrage. This is a sober, unflinching assessment born from watching every single minute of Indiana Fever basketball this season. Every substitution, every rotation, every post-game press conference, every flicker of body language on the bench. And what makes this conclusion so damning is not that it is rooted in emotion. It is rooted in specificity, in patterns, in numbers. In a fundamental incompatibility between a generational basketball talent and a coaching system that was never designed to accommodate her. What you are about to read is the detailed anatomy of a slow-motion collision, a franchise tearing itself apart one awkward 3-minute substitution at a time. On Wednesday, July 8, 2026, Caitlin Clark returned from a 2-week absence due to a back injury. The Lowe's Angel Sparks spoiled her return, beating the Indiana Fever 106-92 to snap a 3-game losing streak. The Sparks were severely shorthanded, taking the floor without stars Kelsey, Plum, and Brink. This was supposed to be a layup game for Indiana, a reintegration game against a depleted opponent. Instead, it became Exhibit A in the case against this entire operation. Clark finished with 9 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and 4 turnovers on 4 of 12.
Benched. And Fever just got blown out. By one of the worst teams in the league. And she got, by the way, she spent more time on the bikes than she did on the floor. And by the way, if Caitlin Clark is only healthy to play, she got subbed off twice in less than 90 seconds and then got subbed back on. You don't sub somebody on and off in 90 seconds for injury reasons. For people like Caitlin was bad before she got benched. She was +6, then she comes on, plays 90 seconds, they hit a couple of threes, and then she comes back on and she's by herself, cold, with the Dantus Van Slooten lineup. So yeah, there's logic to the
shooting, including a 1 of 6 showing from 3-point range in the 106-92 loss. Much of that disjointed performance falls squarely on head coach Stephanie White, who kept Clark on a ridiculously tight leash by limiting her to just 16 minutes. And it was not just the total minutes that raised eyebrows, it was how those minutes were distributed. Clark's 6 stints against the Sparks were staggeringly brief. The longest uninterrupted stretch was 3 minutes and 15 seconds to start the game. Her stints included spells of 2 minutes and 22 seconds, 1 minute and 29 seconds, 3 minutes and 5 seconds, 2 minutes and 18 seconds, and 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Let that sink in. The longest stretch the franchise's most important player played in a single sitting was 3 minutes and 15 seconds, against one of the weakest teams in the league, coming back from injury. Minutes restrictions and sitting 1/2 of a back-to-back are perfectly normal steps for a player returning from injury, but the 2 to 3 minute stints for Clark were bizarre. It's hard to recall another player being brought back in such a manner. 3 5 to 6 minute stints would have made more sense. That is not how you manage a returning star's workload. That is how you ensure she never finds her footing. The official explanation was a minutes restriction due to Clark's back injury. Anytime you've missed a couple weeks, it's going to take time to get acclimated, White said. It's going to take time to build endurance. It's just a tough scenario when you're on a minutes restriction and you're trying to get back into rhythm. A tough scenario indeed.
She's cold. Sophie's injured. She was on the floor with a Dantus, Raven Johnson, who was terrible today, an injured Sophie, and Van Slooten. There's logic to the plus, not logic plus point. There's justifications for the plus minus. But there is no way in hell for people being like, thank you for the $5, hand Olivia Miles the MVP. I mean, you're probably not wrong. Like, it's one of those things with Caitlyn where it's like, whatever. She got subbed after 3 minutes to start the game. Okay, whatever. 3-minute spells are annoying. That was her longest spell on the floor. That was her longest spell on the floor today. Was the 3 minutes she started the game. And she was +6. Caitlin Clark was -22. They were -22 with Caitlin Clark on the floor in her.
But here is the question that the official explanation cannot answer. If Caitlin Clark was only healthy enough to play 90 seconds at a stretch, was she healthy enough to play at all? Think about it logically. If you are genuinely managing a player's health, you give her longer stints with proper rest in between. You do not yo-yo her on and off the court in 60 and 90-second intervals. That is not what injury management looks like. That is not what minutes restrictions look like at any level of professional basketball. You do not send a player to the scorer's table, wave her off, send her back to the bench, then insert her again 2 minutes later for another fleeting cameo. Yet that is exactly what happened against the Sparks. Clark was subbed off twice within approximately 90 seconds of each other during the first half. She would check in, play a possession or two, and then be right back on the stationary bike warming up to go back in again. Each time she returned, she was a little colder, a little more disconnected, a little more visibly frustrated. And here is the moment that strips away any ambiguity. With approximately 2 minutes remaining in the third quarter, Clark stood at the scorer's table ready to sub in. She had been on the bike. She was warm. She was prepared. And then Stephanie White waved her off and sent her back to the bench without setting foot on the court. When the fourth quarter began, Clark was finally inserted. But 30 seconds into the period, White pulled Raven Johnson and substituted in Tyasha Harris. Anyone who has watched a single Indiana Fever game this season knows what that move signals. Kelsey Mitchell is coming in within the next 90 seconds, and when Kelsey enters, Caitlin exits. It is the pattern. It is always the pattern. So White subbed Clark in to start the fourth quarter and then, within 30 seconds, made a decision that guaranteed Clark would be pulled again in under 2 minutes. If that is not a tactical decision dressed up as injury management, then the phrase has no meaning. Clark herself was candid afterward. It's just really hard when you're playing 3 minutes, out 3 minutes, 3 minutes, then you're on the bench. It's really, really hard to get into a flow. Clark, who has previously
1.5 minutes. Like, that's bad. And the worst part is that, like, it's not the what. Like, you can basically say, oh, this is why the Fever were bad, Caitlin Clark bad, and oh, the offense, you know. The offense, when Caitlin Clark is going off, the Indiana Fever play free. They don't really run anything. When the Fever try to do what Stephanie White wants them to do, which, by the way, is every single part of the offense when Caitlin Clark's not on the floor. No matter what happens, every single part of it. Every single part of it is we are getting the ball back to Kelsey Mitchell. Their whole goal is we're getting it back to Kelsey. If you have the ball, your job is to pass the ball to Kelsey. And then Caitlin Clark, by the way, when she comes back on the floor, Kelsey became a decoy. Kelsey just became a decoy. And Caitlin just started going ISO ball. Caitlin shot the ball 12 times in 14 minutes. In 14 and a half minutes today. Like, it is the most Caitlin I've ever seen Caitlin shoot the ball. Like, Caitlin's turnovers are her just trying to force anything because no one's moving and everyone's just kind of standing there. And, like, this current roster, this current game plan, you need one of Caitlin Clark or Kelsey Mitchell. It doesn't work with both.
Previously called minutes restrictions silly, said that Wednesday's plan was not my decision. That quote is telling, not defensive, not angry, just honest, and a little resigned. Numbers do not lie, even when the context around them is complicated. In this first 3 minutes and 15 seconds, Clark's longest stint on the floor, the Fever were +6. That was the best stretch Indiana had all game. Clark was aggressive, under control, making good reads. She looked like the player who was runner-up for MVP in 2024. She looked like someone who could control a game. Then she was pulled, and in her remaining 12+ minutes of action, scattered across 5 more stints, the team was outscored significantly. Clark finished with just 9 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists. Her -16 plus-minus told the story. But the box score alone does not tell you what she was working with. When Clark came back cold after those quick substitutions, she was frequently playing with lineups that were not designed for success. Danielle Robinson, an injured Sophie Cunningham, Courtney Vandersloot, Raven Johnson, who had one of her worst performances of the season. Those are not lineups that set a returning star up to thrive. Those are lineups that look, frankly, like they were assembled to prove a point. Clark's turnovers were not the result of reckless basketball. They were the product of desperation. A rhythm player with no rhythm trying to force anything because nobody around her was moving, and the system was not flowing through her the way it needs to. When a player of Clark's caliber starts hunting shots through sheer repetition, 12 shots in roughly 14.5 minutes, it is because the architecture around her has collapsed. She was taking shots at a pace that would have been unsustainable even in a full 35-minute game. It was the most shot-happy version of Caitlin Clark anyone has ever seen, and it was born entirely from the chaos of constant interruption. This is where the basketball analysis gets uncomfortable, because this is not about any single game. This is about a structural problem that has been festering all season and is now impossible to ignore. Watch the Indiana Fever when Caitlin Clark is off the floor. What you see is Stephanie White's system running as intended. Everything flows through Kelsey Mitchell. Every possession, every action, every decision is designed to get the ball into Kelsey's hands. If you have the ball, your job is to find Kelsey. It is clear, it is organized, it is methodical, and in its own way it works. The night after the Sparks loss, Kelsey Mitchell hit a layup with 10.1 seconds left to finish with 29 points as the Fever beat the Mercury 92-89.
Like, you either choose Ty Harris and Kelsey Mitchell as your starting backcourt, or Raven Johnson and Caitlin Clark. There's enough of a sample size to know. I don't care how many points. I don't care if you show me Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell's ESPN pages and say, look, they're both averaging career highs. This clearly works. No, it doesn't. They are going your turn, my turn. Both of their impacts on the game is exclusively how many points they score and what percentage they shoot. Caitlin Clark does not impact the game really more than makes or misses. Like, she has a lot of assists because she has the ball in her hands a lot. She does not impact the totality of the game anymore. She does not control the pace of the game. She does not control the tempo of the game anymore, which is what she did. You cannot have two players on your team. For people saying at least Kelsey Mitchell can score, before today, there was a half a point difference in their points per game. A half a point difference. Let's be very clear. They're scoring at the same rate. Caitlin just came back from injury today. Like, you cannot run a system with two gunners as your main threats. And the problem is that they're both, I'm not saying they're both undersized, but like, Caitlin's slim and not particularly strong. So they both play like undersized guards. Caitlin needs a bit of length to be an off-the-ball player, but like...
With Caitlin Clark on the bench in street clothes. "I'm just really proud of this group," White said afterward. "We grew tonight. Our execution down the stretch I thought was excellent on both ends of the floor." Listen to the energy in that quote. That is a coach who is genuinely satisfied with how her team played. And Clark was not on the floor. That is not a coincidence. That is a data point in a pattern that has been accumulating all season. When Clark enters the game, the entire system evaporates. Kelsey becomes a decoy. Clark takes over ball handling duties and begins operating in isolation. The offensive structure breaks down from orchestration into improvisation, your turn, my turn basketball. And while both players may accumulate impressive individual statistics, the team as a whole functions worse than the sum of its parts. Before the Sparks game, there was roughly a half-point difference in Clark and Mitchell's scoring averages for the season. Half a point. They were scoring at essentially identical rates. Clark's 2026 numbers through 17 games stood at 21.2 points, 4 rebounds, and 8.2 assists. Mitchell was right there alongside her. Both were putting up all-star numbers. All three Fever stars, Aliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, and Kelsey Mitchell, were named 2026 WNBA All-Star starters for the third consecutive season. But here is the disconnect that the stat sheets do not reveal. Their individual production is not translating to team success when they share the floor. They are both guards who need the ball in their hands to be maximally effective. They both want to control the pace and tempo. They both need to be the primary decision maker. And when you put two players with that profile in the same backcourt, you do not get synergy, you get redundancy. In 2024 Clark's rookie season, she did not just score points. She controlled entire games, she dictated pace. She made every single player around her better because the entire offense flowed through her decision-making. Teams had to account for her presence at all times, which opened up lanes, looks, and opportunities for everyone else on the floor. That is what made her special. That is what made her the runner-up for MVP in a year when she took a historically bad franchise to the playoffs for the first time in 8 years. Now look at what she's been reduced to. A volume shooter trying
3 WNBA point guard in between them. Like, if you want to play Caitlin Clark like you're currently playing Caitlin Clark, you need a fucking Alyssa Thomas or something. Alyssa Thomas out there to be like the guard bigs and, you know, be the point guard and spread it. But it's like, you've now turned Caitlin Clark into a volume shooter and trying to constantly shoot her way into rhythm because she doesn't play long enough spurts to get rhythm naturally. And you might be saying, oh, she was on a minutes restriction. If there is no way in hell. Caitlin got subbed off twice within 90 seconds. She got subbed off twice within 90 seconds. If she's not capable of playing 90 seconds, she's not capable of playing. We need to be honest here. If she is not capable of playing more than 90 seconds, she is not capable of playing, especially because as soon as she gets subbed off, she goes straight to the bike. She goes straight to the bike. Like, this was clearly a tactical thing. Stephanie White, yes, Caitlin's on a minutes restriction. But if Stephanie White really wanted to, Caitlin Clark plays 24-25 minutes. She plays 24-25. You give her a few minutes more than the minutes restriction if you really wanted to. She gave her 15 minutes. She started her, she's like, this is how bad it got. 2 minutes to go in the third quarter, Caitlin Clark is standing at the scorer's table ready to sub in. You know, she got kind of sick of subbing off Caitlin Clark after 2 and 3 minute spurts. Then she subbed off Caitlin before she even got on the floor. She sent Caitlin to get subbed on.
To recapture rhythm through sheer force of will in 3-minute increments. She does not control the pace anymore. She does not control the tempo. She does not dictate the flow of the game. Her assist numbers are still respectable, but they are a byproduct of high usage, not a reflection of genuine orchestration. The game no longer runs through Caitlin Clark. She just happens to be on the floor while the game runs around her. Stephanie White is not a bad coach, let that be clear. White returns to the sidelines in 2026, 1 year after leading Indiana to the cusp of title contention. Selected as the 2023 WNBA Coach of the Year with the Sun, she has made the playoffs in all 5 of her seasons as a head coach. Under her tutelage, the Fever produced the 3rd most points of any team in the WNBA in 2025, especially notable considering Clark missed nearly 3/4 of the campaign. That last detail is critical. White took the Fever to the semifinals without Caitlin Clark for most of 2025. A .500 record and first playoff appearance since 2016 wasn't enough to spare Christie's sides in 2024. White, meanwhile, is only a few months removed from taking Indiana on an underdog run to the WNBA semifinals sans an injured Clark. She knows her system works without Clark. She has proof. She lived it. White is a control-oriented coach. She has a system. She wants that system executed precisely. Every player knows their role, every possession has a designed action, every decision tree is mapped out in advance. And for a coach with that philosophy, predictability is not a dirty word. It is the foundation of success. You might not win championships playing this way, but you will never be terrible. You will hit a baseline level of competence and consistency that keeps you in the playoff picture year after year. The problem is that Caitlin Clark is not a system player. She is a system. You cannot plug her into someone else's framework and expect it to function. She needs freedom to read defenses, react in real time, make split-second decisions based on how the game flows. When she has that freedom, she's nearly impossible to stop because there is no way to game plan for improvisational genius. You cannot prepare for someone who is making decisions faster than you can react to them. But that is precisely what makes her incompatible with a coach who demands systematic precision from every player on the floor. White wants everyone to follow the playbook exactly as drawn. Clark, by her very nature, rewrites the playbook on every possession. Neither approach is wrong in isolation. They are simply irreconcilable when forced to coexist. Anyone who has ever coached basketball at any level, youth league, high school, college, professional, will tell you an uncomfortable truth. Most coaches prefer the less talented player who does exactly what she is told over the supremely talented player who freelances. It is not rational from a talent maximization standpoint, but it is a universal instinct among control-oriented coaches. The obedient role player is predictable. The genius improviser is chaos, even when that chaos produces brilliance. It is almost certain that Stephanie White prefers how this team plays without Caitlin Clark on the floor. You can hear it in the tone of her post-game press conference.
There is no way that when it comes to Caitlin Clark, that this was the minutes restriction she was expecting. She looked demoralized. Like, if Caitlin comes into the game knowing the minutes restriction, knowing she's playing 3 minutes, she's not coming off looking. And by the way, like, first 2 times she was on the floor, she wasn't that bad. She was really good to start the game, and it wasn't that bad in her second spell. She had like 2 points and a turnover. Like, it was whatever. But she comes off after the second time of being subbed off after 90 seconds and looked demoralized. If she was injured, she's not going back in for 3 more spells of 2.5 minutes or less. She's not going in for 3 more spells of 2.5 of tiny minutes if she's injured and constantly going to the bike getting ready to play. Every single time she got subbed off, she looked more demoralized. Like, there is no way that she keeps coming on for 90 seconds if she's injured. Because from everything we've seen, if Caitlin Clark does not feel 1,000%, she's not going onto the floor. If she doesn't think she's able to play, she's sitting out, and the Fever are going to sit her out. Realistically, if that ends up happening, that's what they're going to do. Stephanie White did not want Caitlin Clark on the floor today. Let's be honest. Stephanie White almost certainly would rather have Ty Harris than Caitlin Clark. And you know what? Like, I don't necessarily care. As a coach, you are allowed to make whatever decisions you want.
After games Clark misses, there is a different energy, a genuine satisfaction with execution and team play. You can see it in the substitution patterns, in the way the rotation is structured to minimize Clark's time with the ball in her hands. You can feel it in the way the team's identity shifts the moment Clark checks out and Mitchell checks in as the undisputed focal point. And honestly, that is fine. That is a legitimate coaching preference. Coaches are allowed to have opinions about what makes their team function best. We are allowed to disagree with those opinions, to argue they're strategically short-sighted, to point out that limiting a generational talent is organizational malpractice. But we cannot pretend the preference does not exist. It is written in every minute of this season's game film. This game against the Sparks was not an anomaly. It was a pattern made explicit. The same dynamic played out against the Portland Fire in late May. The Fever were winning 8-4, getting into a good groove. Then White subbed Clark, Aliyah Boston, and Lexi Hull out of the game at the 6:30 mark of the first quarter. And in hindsight, this was the beginning of the end. The Fire went on a 13-2 run before Clark and Boston subbed back in with 3:38 remaining in the first quarter. Clark and Aliyah Boston helped the Fever get off to an excellent start in that game, with Clark recording 3 assists in the opening 3 minutes. Boston scored 4 quick points off 2 of those assists, helping Indiana build an 8-4 lead. However, just as the Fever appeared to be settling into a rhythm, White substituted both Clark and Boston out of the game. The result, the Fever suffered the worst loss of their 2026 season, blown out 180 by Portland. Clark went 1 for 7 from the field for just 6 points in 22 minutes, one of her worst outings since being drafted into the WNBA. Every time Clark gets yanked after just 3 minutes early in a game, the same thing happens. She struggles for the rest of that game. It has happened multiple times this season. It is not a coincidence. It is a predictable consequence of a specific coaching decision applied to a rhythm player who needs
If you've ever coached at any level, if you have ever, like, we can say this as fans, we can point out how ridiculous it is as fans, but if you have ever coached basketball at any level, and anyone who's ever coached will tell you this. We'll tell you this. That as a coach, you prefer the not as talented players that do exactly what you say, versus the supremely talented players that do whatever they want. It is not a surprise. It is not a surprise that Stephanie White probably prefers Ty Harris to Caitlin Clark, because all control freak coaches do. And again, that's not saying Stephanie White is a bad coach. She is a control freak coach. It is her way or the highway. She has a system. You run her system. And in her defense, teams hit a baseline level of success. You're never going to win a title in her system, but you're never going to be bad in her system. That is the way. She is the Sean Dyche of basketball coaches. It is her way or the highway, and that's fine. That is fine. Caitlin played defense, turned the ball over. Caitlin, what did Caitlin do wrong in defense today? What did Caitlin do wrong in defense today? Like, we gotta be honest. Stephanie White clearly prefers how the team plays when Caitlin Clark is off the floor. You can tell by the way she talks about this team. You can tell by the way she talks at the end of games. You can tell by her post-game press conferences and games where Caitlin Clark doesn't play. She prefers how this team plays without Caitlin Clark.
Sustained court time to establish her flow. When your game is built on reading defenses, processing information in real time, and making split-second decisions based on how the game is unfolding, you need time on the court to settle into that cognitive zone. You cannot achieve it in 3-minute bursts. You especially cannot achieve it when you are coming back from injury and trying to shake off 2 weeks of rust. And the emotional toll is visible. Each time Clark got subbed off against the Sparks, especially after those absurdly short stints, she looked more defeated, more demoralized. That is not the body language of someone who knew this was the plan going in. That is the body language of someone who expected to play real minutes and is realizing mid-game that it is not happening. The scrutiny has become relentless. Clark's late scratch with a back injury earlier in the season led to chatter about injury reporting that ended with a warning for the Fever. "It's my life," Clark said of these moments playing out publicly while others opined. If she was truly not healthy enough to play 90 seconds at a time, she would not have gone back in for 3 more micro stints. She would not have spent the entire game cycling between the bench and the stationary bike, warming up and cooling down and warming up again. From everything we have observed over 3 WNBA seasons, if Caitlin Clark does not feel 100% capable of playing, she sits. She does not have play. She is either in or she is out. She was in, but she was never allowed to actually play. The most tragic aspect of this entire situation is that everyone involved was operating under false assumptions. The Fever's 2026 roster was explicitly built to surround Clark, Mitchell, and Boston with talent, hoping those efforts would pay off when it mattered most. Indiana finished 1 game short of the WNBA Finals in 2025 and was aiming to finish the job in 2026. If its estimations proved accurate, the Fever could find themselves hoisting hardware by season's end. White is described as an acclaimed tactical mind and a popular figure in Indiana's locker room. Mitchell said,
We can all make observations. It is almost certain that she prefers how this team plays at Caitlin Clark, and that's fine. That is fine. She is a basketball coach. Basketball coaches are allowed to have whatever opinions they want. We can say they're dumb. I can make the argument that it's a dumb take to have. We're all allowed to do that. We're all allowed to have opinions. We're all allowed to criticize opinions. But at this stage, it's unfair to everybody involved to try keep Caitlin Clark on this team. Like, it's unfair to everybody involved. It's unfair to Caitlin. And I'm not saying it's unfair to Caitlin the human, because I don't know. Caitlin could love these people as a humans. It's unfair to Caitlin the basketball player. And at the end of the day, I don't know Caitlin Clark. I'm not going to speak for Caitlin Clark the human being. I'm only going to talk about the basketball because that's all I know about. It is unfair to Caitlin. It is unfair to Stephanie White. It is unfair to the Indiana Fever organization. It is unfair to Kelsey Mitchell. It's unfair to Ty Harris, who's doing exactly what she's being asked to do. And in the current system, you can make an argument the team functions better with her. And when Caitlin's playing big minutes, she's going to play no minutes. Why take the job? Everybody was promised something different. Let's be very clear. Let's be very, very clear. DeWanna Bonner was promised it was her team. Natasha Howard was promised it was her team. Stephanie White was probably promised you can do whatever you want with Caitlin. Everybody was given false promises. Everyone was.
For no coach has poured as much time into her like White has. So the organization built the roster around the premise that Clark, Mitchell, and White could coexist and thrive together. Mitchell was brought back on a Supermax deal. White was entrusted with full roster control, and Clark was told, implicitly or explicitly, that this team was being constructed around her abilities. But the reality on the court tells a different story. White's system does not need a playmaker. It runs isolation basketball and post-ups. It funnels everything through Mitchell. In that framework, Clark is not a necessity. She is a luxury, a player who, when she's going off, can make you unstoppable. But when she's having an average game, actively undermines the system because she's taking touches away from the design focal point and is not a strong enough defender to compensate. That is the cruelest irony. In Stephanie White's system, Caitlin Clark needs to be playing at a superstar level just to break even. If she is merely playing average basketball, she is a net negative to the team as currently constructed. Not because she is a bad player, she is emphatically not, but because the system was designed to function optimally without her, and her presence introduces friction that only elite performance can offset. This is not a knock on Clark, it is not a knock on White. It is a basketball reality that has played out on countless teams throughout the history of professional sports. Elite players sometimes simply do not fit. The talent is undeniable. The compatibility is non-existent. The Fever have arrived at a fork in the road, and every direction carries consequences. Path 1: keep White, trade Clark. Acquire whatever assets you can, multiple first-round picks, young players, cap flexibility, build around Mitchell, Boston, and White's system. You are probably a sick—
And then subs Caitlin on to start the fourth quarter. 30 seconds into the fourth quarter, she subs off Raven Johnson for Ty Harris. What does that mean? We all know Kelsey Mitchell's coming on the next 90 seconds. It means Kelsey Mitchell's coming in for Caitlin Clark. It means Kelsey's coming in for Caitlin. She subbed on Caitlin to start the fourth quarter, and 30 seconds into the fourth quarter, made a decision she was subbing off Caitlin within the next 90 seconds. This was, as much as Caitlin was on a minutes restriction, this was a tactical thing. And I'm not saying that, Caitlin Clark being on the floor more would have won the Indiana Fever the game. I don't know if she shoots her way into rhythm. I really don't. She did hit a 3 in the fourth quarter. I don't know if she shoots her way into rhythm. She probably doesn't. She wasn't playing well. It was probably too late for her to get her rhythm. But what was the point of playing her? What was the point of playing her? Like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. Like, what was the point of playing Caitlin Clark today? If you were going to play her 15 minutes. And I'm going to be real. Stephanie White realized, not even early in the game, because Caitlin Clark's first 3-minute spell was really good. Caitlin Clark started really well. And if you guys didn't notice anything, it is not uncommon. Like, have you not noticed how bad Caitlin Clark plays in games where she subbed off after 3 minutes? Just want to say that. This is not the first time Caitlin's been subbed after 3 minutes and has struggled the rest of the game because she's never been allowed to get a rhythm. It's not the first time that has happened with Caitlin Clark. It's not.
Seed for the next several years. Competitive, respectable, organized, but never truly threatening for a championship. You hit your ceiling and live there comfortably. Path 2: fire White, rebuild around Clark, blow up the system, start over. Find a coach who understands that Caitlin Clark is not a player you plug into an existing scheme, she is the scheme. It means potentially being bad next year and maybe the year after. It means going back into the developmental wilderness. But if you get the right pieces and the right coaching mind, you might eventually build something extraordinary around a player who comes along once in a generation. Path 3: change nothing, hope for the best, keep everyone, pray that somehow magically Clark and White figure out how to coexist. But the sample size is large enough now. The pattern is clear. The data is in. This does not work. And the longer the organization pretends it might work, the more it wastes everyone's time. Clark's prime years, White's coaching credibility, Mitchell's best remaining seasons, and the patience of a fanbase that has waited years for this franchise to mean something again. Coaching a star at Clark's level can be a double-edged sword. As much as the 2024 Rookie of the Year brings to the table, scheming around her defensive flaws presents a challenge every single game. Benching Clark in critical moments would theoretically solve the problem, but that's a non-starter because it opens its own can of worms. Clark is the central business driver for the Fever and, in a lot of ways, for the entire WNBA. When she scores 6 points and Indiana gets run out of the gym by an expansion team, fans aren't going to just chalk it up to one bad night. The business dimension cannot be ignored. Clark is not just a basketball player for this franchise. She is the economic engine that fills arenas, drives television ratings, and generates the kind of cultural conversation that no other player in the league can replicate. Trading her is not just a basketball decision, it is an existential one. But keeping her in a system—
thought she could mold Caitlyn to something she isn't. Steph thought she could mold Caitlyn, and I'm gonna be real. It is, depending on who the coach is, it's either a flaw or one of the best things about Caitlyn is that no matter what you put up against her, she can always play her game. The problem is she's not adaptable. Like, it is what it is. She's not adaptable. She can't adapt into a system, but she is a system that's nearly impossible to stop. Because there's no way to stop it. Because if you just to stop it, you leave something else vulnerable. Like, you can't stop Caitlyn Clark. You can't stop the Caitlyn Clark system. But yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, it's a pity. It's a pity because like all they needed was a coach to see what happened in 2024 and try to build on from that. But instead they tore it all down. They tore it all down, tried to rebuild a new team that was never going to win. The team that no longer fits Caitlyn Clark. And I'm going to be very clear. If the way Stephanie White wants to play, there's no point in having Caitlyn Clark. Caitlyn Clark's a luxury that there's no point in having. Like, you already have your system. You already have your go-to scorer. You don't need playmakers because you play ISO ball. Like, you don't need a playmaker. In Stephanie White's system, you don't need a playmaker. Which is crazy because you're going to go ISO ball and post up. You don't need a playmaker. You don't need Caitlyn. Caitlyn Clark is a luxury that can be, like, in this current system, Caitlyn Clark is a luxury player that when she's going off can make you unstoppable, but when she's having a bad game is a net negative to your system. Because she has to play so well that her going out of the system is not a net negative on your team. And if Caitlyn's even playing average, she's a negative to this team, currently as constructed. This is not a knock on Caitlyn. This is not a knock on Stephanie White. This is a basketball statement because this has happened in so many teams. There's been so many elite players that just have not fit. Trading Caitlyn for this Indiana Fever team is addition by subtraction. It just is. Unless, of course, you want to get rid of Stephanie White, you want to get rid of everything, and you want to tear it all down.
That diminishes her is its own form of waste, arguably a worse one, because it takes something extraordinary and makes it ordinary. It takes a player who should be controlling games and reduces her to hunting shots in 3-minute windows, trying to shoot her way into a rhythm she is never allowed to develop. There is one more thing that needs to be said, and it is something that, depending on your perspective, is either Clark's fatal flaw or her greatest virtue. Caitlyn Clark is not adaptable. She cannot bend herself to fit someone else's system. She has never been able to do it. At Iowa, she did not play within a system. She was the system. In her rookie year, Christy Sides eventually figured this out and got out of the way. The Fever's turnaround in the second half of 2024 happened precisely because the coaching staff stopped trying to mold Clark and started building around her. 4. Clark has missed time previously due to a back injury this season. In 2025, she played only 13 games due to a myriad of injuries, including her left quad, left groin, right groin, and ankle. Health has been a recurring obstacle, but the talent, when fully operational, remains transcendent. No matter what defensive scheme you throw at her, no matter what tactical adjustments you make, she can always play her game. She will find a way. That stubbornness, that refusal to be contained, is what makes her nearly impossible to stop when properly supported. The Clark system, when you surround it with the right players and the right coaching philosophy, is as close to unstoppable as women's basketball gets. You cannot game plan for it. You can slow it down temporarily, but you cannot shut it down because the moment you commit to stopping one element, she exploits the vulnerability you have created. But that same stubbornness means she cannot be a cog in someone else's machine. She cannot defer. She cannot play off the ball for extended stretches. She cannot be a role player who occasionally goes off. She is either the centerpiece or she is a square peg being hammered into a round hole. There is no middle ground. Stephanie White thought she could mold Clark into something different. That is an understandable ambition. Coaches are supposed to develop players to push them beyond their perceived limitations, to extract capabilities they did not know they had. But some players arrive fully formed. They do not need to be molded. They need to be unleashed. And when you try to contain something that is meant to be unleashed, it does not diminish. It festers, it curdles. It turns into exactly the kind of frustrated, out-of-rhythm, shot-hunting version of Caitlin Clark that the world saw against the Los Angeles Sparks. Here is the final, irreducible truth. The Indiana Fever are stuck in the worst possible middle ground. They have a generational talent who does not fit their system. They have a coach who has proven she can win without that generational talent and who clearly prefers how the team operates in her absence. They have a co-star in Kelsey Mitchell who thrives as the undisputed primary option, but shrinks into a decoy when forced to share the spotlight. They have role players doing everything asked of them but absorbing blame when the results do not come. Nobody is happy. Nobody is thriving. And every game that passes with this unresolved tension is another game wasted, another 3-minute substitution, another stint on the stationary bike, another post-game press conference full of diplomatic non-answers that convince nobody. The Fever built a roster based on promises they could not keep, and now they are watching the consequences play out in excruciating real time. Something has to break, someone has to go, because what exists right now is not a team with a plan. It is a team at war with itself, losing one awkward rotation at a time.